I have an old laptop. Windows has it in a performance chokehold. Could Arch Linux be the answer? Welcome to the distro hopping series, where I try every Linux distro in an attempt to revive this laptop, and maybe, just maybe, convince myself to turn my main Windows PC into a Linux machine. Last time I tried Linux Mint, and honestly it was good, but it didn't quite satisfy all my needs and wants. So this time I decided to document my Arch experience, but with two rules: no help from generative AI, and no ArchInstall command, meaning I'd have to do everything manually. Some say I should try CachyOS, and maybe that'll come, but this shouldn't be that hard, right? I prepared a USB drive with the Arch ISO and booted onto it on the laptop. I knew the first step was partitioning the drive, so I ran fdiskl. This lists all the disks and their partitions. Now, did I A, partition the 256GB NVMe drive inside the laptop, or B, ignore every warning known to mankind and partition the USB drive containing the installer? Well, obviously, I chose B. In my defense, I generally thought Windows was somehow blocking the internal drive since it previously had Windows installed on it. So I partitioned, wrote the changes, and rebooted, and was greeted by a black screen. Naturally, I assumed the ISO was somehow corrupted. I burnt a second Arch ISO onto the USB and tried again. This time, I listed the disks, read them properly, and finally realized how stupid I was. In my notes, I literally wrote USB corrupted after reboot, completely unaware that it was all caused by me. I really need to be more self-aware of my own stupidity. This time, I selected the correct drive and began partitioning properly. I created two partitions, an EFI partition and a root partition, then wrote the changes. I formatted the EFI partition as FAT32 and the root partition as ext4. So far, so good. And honestly, I found this more intuitive than the GUI partitioner in Linux Mint, which I really wasn't expecting. Next up was setting up networks. The guide told me to connect to Wi-Fi using IWCTL. Using the station commands, I connected to my home network after a bit of trial and error. At first, it just refused to work, but turns out my keyboard layout was set to US while I was typing with a UK layout, meaning my Wi-Fi password wasn't actually what I thought it was, or at least that's what Reddit said. A Redditor suggested switching the keyboard layout, and immediately it worked. Just a classic Linux moment. With the internet sorted, I moved on to the mirrors. I synced Pacman's repositories, Pacman being Arch's package manager, which is basically its app store, and using Pacman I installed Reflector, which finds fast and up-to-date download mirrors. For anyone less technical, a mirror is just a download server, and Reflector helps pick the one that is the fastest. Finally, I was ready to install Arch. I mounted the root partition and ran the install command to pull in the base system, firmware, and a text editor, which is important because everything at this stage happens in a terminal. I then used genfstab to generate the fstab file. This file is basically the system's configuration table and a set of rules that tells Linux what drives exist and how to mount them at boot. After that, I entered the installer using archchroot. Inside the system, I configured the time zone and the locale using a few simple commands. Even though I thought I had internet access in the installer, I still needed to configure networking for the actual Arch install. I named the machine my Arch, edited the following file using nano, and added the necessary entries. And I set the root password. At this point, Arch was officially installed. No GUI, no safety nets, just vibes. But we're not done yet. At this point, Arch technically existed, but it still wasn't bootable. So next up, Grub. I installed Grub using Pacman and set it up following a tutorial, making sure it actually knew where my EFI partition was and how to boot the system. After installing it and generating the configuration file, I finally had something that resembled an operating system that could start without a USB stick. Huge progress. However, there was still a pretty big problem. Right now, the only user on the system was root. And while root feels powerful, it's also incredibly dangerous. Root can do anything, delete the entire system, overwrite critical files, and completely brick the install with a single typo. And considering my track record so far, that's not a risk I should be allowed to take. So the next step was creating a normal user. This user would be my everyday account, limited permissions, safer defaults, and no ability to destroy the system unless I explicitly asked for it. I created a new user, gave it a home directory, and set a password. Then I added that user to the wheel group, which allows for the use of sudo. If you're not familiar, sudo is basically Linux asking, "Are you sure you want to do something stupid?" and then making you type your password before doing so. I also enabled sudo access for the wheel group by editing the sudo as file carefully, because messing up that file would have been a fantastic way to end the video early. This system is almost ready. Time for a desktop environment. I chose KDE Plasma. I saw it praised in the comments in a previous video, and I had a fun idea to spice up the theme later. This was super simple and only took 3 3 commands. I exited the installer, shut down the system, removed the USB drive, and was ready to boot into our new ArchInstall. Huh. Black screen. Great. I did not panic, however. I launched back into the bootable USB and reinstalled grub, which showed me that the kernel didn't install correctly as grub did not recognize any ArchInstall. I reran the Linux firmware install command and boom, we're in. Wait, we have no internet. Oh, easy. Let's open the terminal and fix that. Huh. No terminal. So I really did have to install everything myself. Reddit informed me that I can access a terminal with Ctrl-Alt-L4. Or the TTY menu, which worked, but Network Manager wasn't installed, but I had no Network Manager to install Network Manager. Back to the bootable USB. Using IWCTL again, I connected to my Wi-Fi inside the installer and enabled Network Manager from there. Back in the desktop environment, Network Manager was on, but was failing to connect to a network. But in TTY, I was able to use commands to manually connect to my network. At this point, there's 3 hours of footage of just the installation. With a Wi-Fi connection established, I was able to install console, the recommended terminal for Arch. Finally, we're done.
No.
Wi-Fi is still not working after rebooting. Back to the bootable USB. Hey, guess what? I didn't install a kernel. I can't be trusted with technology with no supervision. Why are you not subscribed? I'm trying to hit 3,000 subscribers before February, and 99.9% of you aren't subscribed? Do it. Please. On the surface, Arch feels surprisingly familiar, but the headaches are always lurking in the background. It gives you just enough stability to think everything is fine, right up until everything breaks with absolutely no warning. The fact that I was able to use this system without even realizing there was no kernel was genuinely scary. What else did I break or forget to install that's just sitting there waiting to take the system down? I'd only recommend doing this the hard way if you're genuinely a techie person, and if not, honestly, just use ArchInstall or pick something more user-friendly. I enjoyed the pain, clearly. I kept going, but after this experience, options like CachyOS suddenly look very tempting. That said, this was always meant to be a learning experience. It's only made me want to be more curious, especially since I've been planning to try a modern version of the Hannah Montana Linux, which has been ported to a modern Arch. It will be completely hands-on, probably fragile, and almost definitely a bad idea, so of course, I'll do it. The important thing is that the system felt snappy, maybe even slightly faster than Mint, not in any measurable way, but hands-on it just felt smoother to use. Changing the themes was super simple, but that's mostly down to the desktop environment I chose. KDE Plasma lets you install user-made themes directly from system settings, which has made customization ridiculously easy. That said, I definitely found myself Googling things a lot more often on Arch than I ever did on Mint. But once you know what you're looking for, installing software is just as easy as using an app store. It's usually just sudo pacman-s and then just the app name. Simple, fast, and very Arch. This series isn't just about giving this laptop a new life. It's also whether I can realistically just main Linux and replace Windows completely. And like it or not, gaming is usually where Linux loses people. Anti-cheat support is still a mess on Linux, especially for multiplayer games, but that's not a big deal for me since I rarely play competitive titles anyway. For this laptop, the 2 main games I tested were CS2 and The Witcher 3, and honestly neither of them went well on Linux Mint. CS2 technically shouldn't need Proton, and loads of people commented it, but for me it simply wouldn't launch without Proton enabled. Even then, it was inconsistent, and to this day I still don't know why it behaved like that. The Witcher 3 was even worse. Despite being one of the most Linux tested games out there, I couldn't get it running properly at all on Mint. But to prepare, I set up Swap, which basically acts like extra system RAM by using the storage drive. Not ideal, but it helps compensate for the painfully low 8GB of RAM in this laptop. The Witcher 3 didn't run on Mint or Windows at all, but somehow it ran on Arch. Now the word run is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. It was locked to 720p and crawling along at a handful of frames per second. But the fact that it even launched felt like a small miracle. Oh, and full screen? Yeah, it didn't work. Neither did CS2. Again, I survived Arch. But I'm not convinced it beats Linux Mint. So for now, it takes second place. The pain was fun, but figuring out what was actually going wrong and why took a long time. A very, very long time. Arch Linux. Quite the experience. I loved it. It hurt me, and somehow I learned a lot about Linux. If you've never tried Arch, you probably should, at least once. Like and subscribe, because Arch, by the way,